My name is Charlie Sorensen. I'm the president of the Kittitas County League of Women Voters. And on behalf of the League and the co-sponsors of this event, CWU Libraries, the Associated Student Government of CWU, and Ellensburg Public Library, I'd like to welcome you to this event, which we're calling Let's Talk About Presidential Primaries. So, students are welcome to join the League for free at this time. The League of Women Voters was formed to help educate and inform voters. We take no position on political parties or candidates at any level. We just want people to be informed voters. This event is being recorded and will be shared on our League YouTube channel, ECTV2, Spectrum Channel 191, and I believe ASCWU's channel as well. Ballots for the presidential primary are in the mail. I got mine today. So I encourage you to look for your ballot if you're a registered voter, and if you haven't registered yet, there's still time to do so. Also, if you know anyone who will turn 18 on or by November 5th this year, if they're 17 at this time, they may vote in the presidential primary, but they must be registered to do so. ASCWU has provided taco fixings in the back for students. Please make free with it, because I think there's a lot of food back there. Please keep the following in mind. The purpose of this event is to educate voters on how the presidential primary evolved, why voters must declare a party affiliation in order to participate, and what the two parties will do with the results of this election. This is not the venue to debate presidential candidates, electioneering, or to bash political parties or panel members. Near the end of this discussion, we will display a QR code for those students wishing to take advantage of University 101 credit. So let's get started. Tonight's panel includes Kittitas County Auditor Bryan Elliott, Kittitas County Republican Party Chair and RNC National Committee Woman for Washington State, Marlene Pfeifer, Kittitas County Democrat Party Representative and past Kittitas County Auditor Jerry Pettit, and political science professor since 1996, Todd Schaefer. Moderating tonight's panel is Noel Garcia, the Civic Engagement Coordinator for ASCWU Governmental Affairs Office. Please join me in welcoming the panel. Take it away, Noel.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Welcome, everybody. We appreciate y'all so much for being here. In a little bit, I think the food will be ready, so throughout the thing, if y'all want to, feel free to go ahead and see yourself throughout the event. It looks like it's all ready, so, have at it. The format for tonight will be a short introduction on presidential primary nomination by Professor Schaefer, followed by Auditor Elliott discussing the process, and each party representative will then describe how the individual parties will use the results. There will be a Q&A period for audience questions, and I just want to remind y'all this is an informational night. So again, please come up with any questions that y'all have. We have a lovely special panel here that will provide us all the information and answers that y'all might have. So without further ado, let's hear it from Professor Schaefer.
Thank you. So I want to answer the questions first. What are primary elections in general? What are presidential primaries in particular? And what do they do? And briefly, how did we get them? If people are interested in the Q&A afterward, I can talk about some of their implications, consequences, weirdness, etc. So, first, primary elections are really nominations that use an election system to determine that. So, they're basically runoff elections for a particular office. Here we're talking about president, which is a bit unusual, as I'll get into. But it could be governor, senator, etc. for the general election in November, okay? And by the way, we're mainly talking about the two major parties here, the Democrats and Republicans. The minor parties might use primaries, but they have other methods, and it depends on the state. So to use this general example, let's say several people want to run as Democrats for governor. How does the party figure out which one is going to face off to carry the donkey flag into battle against the elephants in November? Well, all the Democrats run against each other within a party and the Democratic voters. Now again, how you define that can be broad. They can have to be registered Democrats or lifelong ones or just decide that day. They vote and the winner of that is the nominee. At least that's how it happens in most states, not Washington. We kind of use a crazy top two primary where it's really just a runoff election between everyone. But that's pretty much what primaries do in the vast majority of states in the US. Okay, so presidential primaries are a bit different. Even though the presidency is a national office, we're a federal system made up of states, and the national parties, like the National Republican Party or whatever, are in a sense made up of state parties. So the question then becomes, how do the parties figure out who will be their presidential standard bearer in November? Well, ever since about the 1840s, both parties have met in national conventions in the summer every 4 years, and all the 50 states send delegates, which is somewhat determined by how big the state is, but there are other factors I won't go into. But they send delegates from their state to Philadelphia or Milwaukee or whatever great city the party has picked. And those state delegates to the convention essentially get together and pick the nominee. So in other words, the majority, the candidate that gets the majority of delegates voting for them is crowned as king or queen of the X party and gets to face off with the other party's opponent and any other minor parties in November, okay? Now, that raises the question then, how does each state determine who these delegates are? Well, each state then has a primary election. Some use this thing called caucuses, but I won't complicate it, to figure out how many of its delegates are going to support, let's say on the Republican side, Donald Trump, Governor Nikki Haley, Senator Tim Scott, Mr. Potato Head, whoever it is. So people calling themselves Republicans vote for these candidates at their state level, and then the state allocates delegates to each candidate, okay? Now, usually this is proportional, and again, parties have slightly different rules, but to use an example, if Joe Biden gets 50%, if you have 100 delegates from New Hampshire, let's say, if Joe Biden gets 50% of the vote, he gets 50 delegates that go to the convention, pledge to vote for him. If Mr. Potato Head gets the other 50%, he gets 50 delegates for him. So, then when we add up all these delegates from across the country, whichever candidate has a majority, they become the one that is officially nominated as the presidential candidate at the convention, okay? So that's how it works. Now, how did we get this thing? Well, I don't have time to bore you with history, and I can talk about more of it in the Q&A, or you can even take my elections class this next fall. But this is another thing you can blame your boomer parents for. Actually, it's probably a better system in a lot of ways than the one it replaced. But essentially, to make a long story short, the way the delegates from states were picked for the National Convention pretty much up to the 1960s was a pretty closed process. And while it wasn't an old boy network, I guess you could call it a party crony network, where loyal party members were chosen in what they called smoke-filled back rooms, so they had to maybe secret or closed meetings to decide you'd be a delegate to go to the convention. And then they would go, unpledged to any candidate, to bigger smoke-filled rooms at the National Convention, where the presidential wannabes from that party would try to woo them, and they would basically meet and wheel and deal until they eventually settled on a nominee, okay? Now, all this changed in 1968 when there was an actual riot at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, both inside the convention hall among the delegates, and there was another one outside with protesters and police over the Vietnam War. But really, it was more over the fact that the sitting Vice President, Hubert Humphrey, won the nomination after not having any kind of public vetting. He just schmoozed with the delegates. He didn't even enter some of the non-binding state primary beauty pageants, as they were called, they had. And worst of all for the Democrats, he went on to lead a divided party and actually lose the election to their hated rival, Richard Nixon. So, the Democrats enacted reforms at the national level, starting with the 1972 election, to make the selection process more democratic, with a little d. Okay? Basically, remember, it's the 60s. Power to the people, man! Okay, so they basically said your delegation had to be more reflective of what the Democrats in your state wanted. And the easiest way for state parties to comply to this was to go to primary elections. And because elections are regulated by state law and run by the states passed new laws to meet the Democratic rules that in turn also affected the Republicans too. And here we are. We've been doing it this way ever since. So I'll stop there because I don't want to give too much of a lecture.
Check, 1, 2. All right, so now Bryan and Elliott will be presenting to us. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Hey, thanks everybody for showing up tonight. This is a great turnout. I guess when you get some free tacos and some college credits, makes for a well-attended event. I'm also honored to be here with a great panel. Appreciate Dr. Schaefer leading us off there with his wisdom. A lot of good history to set the foundation for this conversation. So I'm the Kittitas County Auditor. I just kind of want to talk a little bit about the elections process in general in Washington State, and then I'll kind of dive into the presidential primary, what makes that process unique. So Washington is an all vote by mail state. We've been that way for 20 years. I was not a voter then. Some of you were probably not born yet, or maybe very little, but it's been that way for a long time here. So had a lot of time to improve upon and make that system work well. But basically what it looks like from a high-level overview is this. Is the first step in the voting and elections process, of course, is registration, which is an ongoing and continuous process. So hopefully everybody in here is a registered voter. If you're not, you can register anytime. There's no cutoff. You can register all the way up until 8 p.m. on election day and actually vote in that election. So there's lots of time and opportunity to participate. And we at our level, the county level, we have all those voters uploaded into our database, which is called Vote Law. It's a statewide system, and we manage our portion of it. And again, it's a continuous process. We've got some great staff who do that every single day. But as we get closer to an actual election, and right now we're actually in 2 active elections, and we're going to be taking on a 3rd here with April special. So running elections concurrently can be confusing, but we're making it happen. But as we prepare for any election, we've got a couple of different steps. So we've got to design the ballot. So that's getting the candidates in the races. If there's any districts that are going to put like tax measures on the ballot, they're going to send us their resolutions, and we're actually going to design that ballot. And then we're going to do what essentially it's a pre-election audit. It's called an LWV test. It is an audit of a test deck of ballots, where we're ensuring that what's going through our scanner and tabulator system is actually reflective of the hand count of those ballots. We've got our ballot printing with our commercial printer, and then those ballots are mailed out 21 days prior to the election. So those of you who are receiving your ballots today, I got mine, those were actually mailed out on Tuesday. So we do 21 days here, and that makes sure that by 18 days prior to the election, everybody should have their ballots. Now, once you get your ballot, you got to vote your ballot. You vote your own ballot. You make sure you sign your envelope, and then you're going to return it to us. Which there's 2 main ways to do that. So we got our ballot drop boxes. We've got 10 secure ballot drop boxes across 9 different locations, because there's 2 at the county courthouse here in Ellensburg. Those are picked up regularly. I love doing that. It's one of my favorite jobs, being the auditor. I get to drive around beautiful Kittitas County with one of my staff members or one of our paid seasonal workers, and just hang out and visit all the cool ballot sites. So we pick those ballots up. We'll bring them back to the election center. We'll continue processing. The other way that you can get your ballot to us, of course, is through the mail. So Washington State, you get free postage. You can mail it back USPS, and that'll get to our office. It just has to be postmarked prior to election day. So if you're going to turn it back to the USPS on election day, make sure you do it early in the day. Especially rural mail carriers, sometimes they get a little bit behind. So we get those ballots back in, and now we're going to process those ballots, which is really 4 separate steps. So those ballots come in, they're going to go to our election center. We're going to log, we're going to batch them, which is just to say put them in different groups by the date and locations that they were picked up. And the reason we do that is it's easier to control for an audit. 200 ballots, right, in different increments than like 18,000 ballots we're all getting in at once and trying to account for them. So we get them in their batches, and then we're going to take a signature verification. So they've got a barcode on them. We scan that. Your signature that you've signed at Department of Licensing or on your voter registration form, or both, because it'll do all your signatures, will pop up on the screen, and we compare that to the actual signature on your envelope. So when you guys are signing your ballots, especially for young folks, sometimes what we see is you did a signature when you registered, especially for our 16, 17-year-olds who registered, and you're like, I do not know what my signature is going to be, right? Or we see folks who get married, and there'll be a lot of variance. So just as best as you can, keep your signature updated with us. And try to sign like you registered. So that'll help us get through that process. If the ballot is good, which most of them are, they get through that, and they go to ballot opening and inspection. So we're going to open and separate the ballots, because at this point we want the envelopes to be separate from the ballots. The envelopes are individualized to the voter, the ballots are common. So we separate those out so that we maintain the secrecy for that voter. Once we do that, we're going to start the scanning process. This can be ongoing pretty much from when we start receiving ballots all the way up until election day. We're going to continue to scan. What's happening when we're scanning is all that data is the ballot images that are being loaded onto a USB, which is the back of the CPU of the scanner. It's loading all those images, We get to election night. At 8 p.m., we're going to take that USB and we're going to put it into the tabulator. And we're going to hit the button on the tabulator, and that's going to convert all those images into ones and zeros, calculate them up, and that gets you your unofficial initial results right there. So that's kind of a high-level version of what gets us to election night. And then from election night, we'll have some continued processing, because we get some ballots in from the mail that come in that were postmarked on time. We do our final pick up the ballot boxes on that Wednesday morning following election day. We'll continue to process those ballots, and we hit the canvassing board. We've also got a random batch audit, which is like the LNA but backwards, to make sure that the scanner and the tabulator are still picking up the correct images. So it's a hand count against a known hand count against scanning and tabulation. We'll do the canvassing board, which we just did a round of that today for the February election, where we actually review all those ballots that had signature issues or came in too late. And then ultimately that takes us to the certification process when the canvassing board certifies the election, which is what we'll do tomorrow in February. So that's a very high-level view of how the elections process works. I know that was a lot, but that's supposed to set the stage for the presidential primary. So what makes this different is this is and I think Dr. Schaefer alluded to it, this is a nomination process, right? So we're facilitating this for the major parties. So you're going to get one ballot. It's going to have Democrats and Republicans on it. But the important thing to remember is to only vote one side of that ballot, and whatever side of that ballot you vote has to match what you select on your envelope, right? So your envelope's going to look different too. It's going to say, I declare as a Democrat or I declare as a Republican. You got to select just one of those, not both. And then you got to pick one side of the ballot or the other. And these are actually not really state rules. These are the party's rules. We're just facilitating the process. But what happens is, and a lot of folks, they do this no issues, right? Obviously, all the instructions are on there. But it can be confusing because we're not used to doing this in Washington state elections. So sometimes what we see is folks will mark two parties, or they'll mark the Republican side and then they'll vote in the Democrat and the Republican side. The challenge with this is, of course, like we said, when we get to ballot opening and inspection, and those envelopes are separated from the ballots, we don't know what you declared on your envelope. And if we can't figure out what you declared on your envelope, those ballots that are in the Republican pile or they're marked both parties, we're not going to be able to count those ballots. So that's really the key thing to keep in mind is mark one party on your ballot envelope, and then make sure you vote whatever party you marked, you got to vote for just that side on your actual ballot, right? Now, some folks just forget to mark a party. In general, we can fix that because we won't even open the ballot envelope. We say, hey, no party's marked. We'll send you a cure form, essentially, and you can say, hey, no, I want to declare it as party, and then when we get it back, we'll be able to process your ballot accordingly. So those are kind of like the big key things that make this election different. As far as a processing standpoint, and I know Mr. Pettit can probably speak some detail to this as well, it's super, super complex. The election staff, they work really hard on this. It's probably the hardest election to administer because we've got to, once we get to signature verification, we're going to have to actually separate out, folks who declare Republican and Democrat and keep those separated during the whole process. So you don't have any confusion about if you have in the Republican stack a Democrat ballot, we got to make sure that that was the voter's mistake and not us crossing those ballots. So we're excited. It's going to be a fun process. It's my first presidential primary, so I'm excited for it. It's going to be a good event. We're looking for a good turnout, and happy to answer sort of any questions you have on the process.
So thank you so much, Bryan, Elliott. Now we are going to move on to Marlene Pfeifer.
Thank you for doing this. I think this is a great idea, so thank you again. As they mentioned, I'm the Teresa Task County Republican Party, and I'm also the National Committee woman for the state of Washington, representing the RNC. I have a really easy task here tonight because it's pretty minimal what happens to get on the ballot. This is what I've been tasked to say, and to be on the Republican Party. I also got my ballot just today, and there are 5 Republicans listed: Chris Christie, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, and Donald Trump. In order to do that, they had to submit 12 signatures from the Washington State Republican Party, which consists of the county chair, state committeeman, and state committeewoman from each county in the state makes up the Washington State Republican Party. So they had to get 12 signatures to at least move them forward. And the big one, they had to pay $20,000 to the party. So Washington State Republican Party got $100,000 from these 5 candidates, and just as a side note, there's a lot of other states that charge a lot more. South Carolina, which is doing their primary this weekend, charges $50,000 a candidate. So basically, that is the only thing that is required: the fee and the 12 signatures from state committee people, and then it is submitted to the Secretary of State's office.
All right, thank you so much, Marlene Pfeifer. Now we are going to go with Jerry Pettit.
Good evening. This is pretty awesome, and as has been said, I really like the turnout. We enjoy doing these things because it provides good education, particularly for the students, as well as an opportunity that was started years ago for the student hubs, or what we used to call the Election Assistance Center for Central Washington University, where the students have an opportunity to come here on campus to vote. That's something that is now statewide, which is pretty awesome for each of you to be able to do that here on campus. And we also have, of course, as Auditor Elliott talked about, the ballot drop boxes throughout the state. We have one right outside the CERC that's permanent, as well as the one that the auditor's office provides in here during the student hub. So please take advantage of those. It's very important. The Democrat Party does things just a little bit differently than the Republican Party. Of course, hello, that would not be a surprise to me at all. So, as Professor Schaefer talked about, this is a nominating primary, which is very different than what Washington State's is, which is called a winnowing primary. So when you go to a nominating primary, that means that everyone who votes, as Marlene talked about, you have to pick your party as far as what you're going to vote for. So in 2016, for a little bit of history, the Democrat Party only used 50%, only allocated delegates to the national convention using 50% from the primary and 50% using caucuses. Prior to that was, like the previous presidential election, there was no presidential primary in the state of Washington, so it was all caucus. In 2020, the party allocated delegates based upon the primary results, which is also what they're going to do this year. So what that means is there are 110 delegates that are picked throughout the state within the Democrat Party to go to the national party. And they're going to be allocated based upon the results of that nominating primary election. So there could be all kinds of things there with anywhere from, depending on the percentage. But the other piece of that is they allocate to different groups. So there's congressional district level, which is 60 delegates. There's automatic party leaders and elected official delegates with 18 delegates. Pledged party leaders and elected officials, 12, and then 20 at-large delegates. They are all done separately but allocated based upon the results of the primary election. That's pretty much it.
All right, thank you so much, Jerry. Now we are going to open up the floor to the crowd. So this is the Q&A portion of this event. Would anybody like to start? We got a question from Charles.
I don't have to stand up, right? Yes, that's okay. So you said that to be on the primary ballot, right, they have to pay a fee for the Republican Party and then get the signatures. So not every state does a primary then, correct?
That's correct. Iowa does caucuses, as do others, and some do joint. Nevada just did a caucus and a primary. And I believe South Carolina did something, not caucuses, but something similar. That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question?
No one.
Here you go, lady.
Okay, hi, my name is Layla. I'm a student here, and I know this event is to kind of like inform students and other people in the community to vote and like the importance of it. And I know this upcoming election it'll be my first time being able to vote for the president. And I know me and a lot of other youth are pretty like discouraged because we feel pretty disappointed with who the options are, and I feel like that's kind of something. Kind of in almost every presidential election I've seen, the options aren't great, at least in my standpoint, and that's why, at least for me, I don't think I'm going to vote, or if I do, I'm going to vote for a minor party, which isn't that effective, right? But I guess like what would you guys have to say to that issue? Because I know like there is low civic engagement with youth, but I also think that's a part of the fact that a lot of youth are very progressive and don't see real change happening with any of the people who are going to be in power.
I got something to say, but I'll let anybody else on the panel chime in.
Of course.
He's young and I'm older. Not old, older. So I remember listening to former Secretary of State Kim Wyman talk about what happens when people decide not to vote. When you do that, you are allowing everyone else who does vote to make those decisions for you. Understanding, yes, there are frustrations amongst a lot of people about who our candidates may be. But if you go out and vote and therefore you are participating, you have the opportunity, if you participated, to of course complain about the results. But if you don't participate, you're not taken the opportunity to actually speak your voice. The fewer people that participate, the more opportunity there is for the candidates that you're frustrated with to become nominated. If you begin voting and vote for some of the others who are on the ballot, who are not necessarily the highest percentage in the polls, then you have an opportunity then to make a difference both at the state level and at the national level. Does it happen right away? Probably not. But the more you participate over the years, the more opportunity there is for you and many of your students, friends, to be able to have that say in where things are going. Again, if you choose not to vote, you're letting everyone else who does speak for you. And that's really something that's that I see as a frustrating. You know, some of the elections, the presidential election, you'll get 80 to 90% of the voting public to vote. Why don't you vote in the primary? Why don't you vote in the elections that make up how much taxes you're going to pay? So those are the things that you really need to be involved in. But unless you vote, you're letting everyone else pick that for you.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. And I couldn't agree with that more. I'd also say that you're not alone, right? So there's I think national polls say 60 to 70% of folks don't want, let's have real talk, don't want to see a 2020 rematch. Those are national polls. I'll also say that if something else in the news, there's a pretty serious third-party group, right? Or not a third party, but a non-partisan or independent group which is considering putting up a third-party candidate that's well-funded with millions of dollars, probably more serious than we've seen since 1996 with Ross Perot's. Was it 96 or 92, Dr. Schaefer? 92? Both. Yeah, 92 was the really successful one though for the last time we had a serious independent candidate. So the reason I say that is that so I'm looking at the draft, the screenshot I took of the ballot. So out of all the folks on here, I think 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 out of the 8 have actually suspended their campaigns so far, right? And so why vote for those folks or why participate in the process? I think a lot of it has to do with there are lots of other groups and people out there who are watching and seeing what percentage of the vote goes to different candidates, right? And then the other thing I'll say is that there's life after 2024. So whether we end up with the rematch that you stated you don't want to see or not, there's going to be a 2028 election, and neither of the two folks who are front runners right now will be able to participate in 2028. So what happens then, right? All the votes that are cast that go to those other folks, right? That speaks to something that maybe sets conditions for the type of change that you want to see. So that's what I'd say.
I just want to jump in on what Mr. Pettit said, because while we're focusing on the presidential primary right now, what he said is local elections are the most important thing. That's what affect us personally. That's the most important thing, and very few people vote in those. So along with the presidential primary and general elections, I'd encourage you to vote at the local level.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, piggybacking on Bryan's point, so this year is an odd primary case because you have, when a sitting president runs for re-election, they pretty much are dominant in their own party unless they've really alienated a lot of them. Although it's an open process, people can challenge. We've had presidents that have had to face intra-party challenges. But and then on the Republican side, you have an ex-president. Normally when presidents lose, they don't try to run again, although we've had it in our history. So this is an unusual year. If you go back 4 years ago, there were 20 people that tried to run for president as Democrats originally when the process started. Now that quickly winnowed. And 4 years before that, there were 14 or 15 Republicans who threw their hat in the ring. Now those were unusually large. We usually get about 10 plus or minus when it's open. So I would say you might as well get a practice of doing this now, because you're going to be doing it for the rest of your life. This is my 7th one that I voted in, so it might not be a bad idea to at least learn about how the process works. But yeah, it's a little unusual this year, I would admit that.
Yeah, well, thank you guys.
We're going to pass it on to Charles. I just want to say real quick, these are some really good questions, so keep them coming. Thank y'all so much for the engagement.
Hi, I'm Charles. I'm a student. I didn't introduce myself before. So I know you had mentioned that in order to get on the ballot for a Democrat, it's a little different. But maybe I wasn't paying attention, but I think I might have missed what the difference was. Would you mind explaining that again?
So, did not look that up. Really straightforward. However, what I was going to mention is on the state Democrat website, there is a full document that describes the process in detail. It's very complex, but you can go through and find out the answers to some of those kinds of questions relatively quickly. Whether it costs for the Democrats to be on the ballot, I don't know the answer to that question. But there is a process, and again, I don't know that process. That document will explain it to you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? We'll go with Mariana and then we'll go with Charlie.
Hello. I'm trying to figure out how I want to word this, but of course, my name is Mariana and I'm also a student here. And I'm very new to the electoral process and stuff like that, which is why I came here, because I want to be more informed. And I remember, because I'm a board member on MECHA, we did a electoral workshop back in November, and then that's kind of when I had an eye-opener to seeing how low the turnout is locally for elections and stuff like that, especially in my own perspective. I'm still pretty new to the landscape out here. So I guess to your guys' knowledge, what kind of resources and guidelines for outreach are established to make sure that residents out here are aware of local elections and these other things that are coming up, especially since we're talking about primaries and all these caucuses and things of that nature, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so I think, we're a small elections office. So we have a voter registration person. She's also the one who sort of manages the database on a day-to-day basis. We don't have a ton of resources independently to go out and do a ton of voter outreach. I went to farmers market this summer. We're doing some work with the league. We've got our disability advisory committee, which also does a lot of voter outreach stuff as much as we can. But really, in our office, just because we're small and rural, it's a real challenge just from a staffing and a funding perspective. Fortunately, though, and I'll say this, we rely a lot on our third-party groups like the league. We put on events like this, right, to get the word out and just do some general voter outreach. They've got a great social media presence. We recently did a video with them that'll hopefully be going up soon that'll kind of outline the different ways that voters can participate in the process. The other thing I'll say too is that the most effective, the elections that get the most engagement are the ones in which you have candidates or parties that are just going after it. So we just had an election up in the Upper County. That was our February special election. It's Cleveland Roslyn School District. We had pretty good voter turnout. We had just about 40% voter turnout. And that was because that school district was pushing. I mean, you had high school kids who were going out in the community and saying, hey, please support the schools, right? And it ended up passing 68%. So when the folks, the candidates, or the groups that are on the ballot are really out there promoting, that's when you really start to get some good engagement, especially in our rural community.
So as far as the Republican Party goes, I know you mentioned caucuses and stuff. I wish there was a lot better way of getting the word out for everything. It's really tough, especially because very few people even get the daily record or anything else. But as for each county, we had to put it out there in the media somewhere. We put it social media, but of course, if you don't subscribe to our party or somebody shares it, you're not going to see it. So we started with precinct caucuses. I was talking about just being on the ballot earlier, but we had precinct caucuses. Every county in the state for the Republican Party, January 13th, had precinct caucuses. And then we have county conventions. At the precinct caucus, we vote on delegates to go to the county conventions. And those are any time between now and March 15th. Our Kittitas County one is March 2nd. And then at the county convention, we vote on delegates to go to the state convention, which is April 18th and 19th, I believe. And at the state convention, we vote on delegates to go to the national convention in Milwaukee, July 15th through the 19th.
So the Democrat Party does something very different, only our caucuses and convention and things are just a little bit later. But as a candidate, and I think Auditor Elliott can speak to this as well, is no different than what the Secretary of State's office, the county auditor's offices, candidates, organizations that have items on the ballot. It's become very, very difficult to get the word out. You have so many different social media options. People don't read newspapers anymore. They get everything on the web, on the web. And it's become very frustrating to try to work through that. So what you're talking about is no different than what we talk about. How do I get the information to be able to make a good decision? It's become extremely difficult for us, for anyone to get the word out, to provide education, but it's also become very difficult for the public to find out that information. The more engaged an organization that has an item on the ballot, the more engaged candidates are. Thank you to the League of Women Voters. They do fantastic candidate nights. They advertise those. They usually get good turnout, but sadly, I don't see young people at those candidate nights. Yes, the league records them. I don't know if they have any information about the number of people who actually watch those YouTube videos, but that's become frustrating for everyone, no matter who it is, both people who are trying to find out information as well as those who are trying to get information out. So if you got answers, man, would I love to hear that.
Thank you.
So actually, if I could say one more thing. Jerry brought up a really good point. How do you get your information? Like, what social media do you follow?
Honestly, the most realistic answer, just because of, like, my generation, honestly, it all just gets blasted on TikTok because, like,
See?
but it's honestly a little bit of everywhere because I do try and do, like, my own personal research to my own discretion because, of course, like, you can't obviously trust what just comes up on your, like, For You page. But I do try and look into other news outlets and kind of, like, adjust, like, search engines and use, like, very critical wording when trying to find my own information. But that's what I can say for myself, but I don't think a lot of people in my generation, can say the same, unfortunately.
So that's great. I appreciate it. I'm not judging you at all. So I'm like one generation above you. I'm the Facebook generation, right? And so Mr. Pettit, with News Auditor, they set up a Facebook page, and I run the Facebook page. And I'm like super excited. I'm like out there posting on Facebook, right? I get like 1 or 2 likes on my Facebook post. And I know I ain't reaching any young people because there's probably a lot of y'all who are like, Facebook, wow, it's for old people like me. So, but you see what I'm saying, right? It's like, and I don't even know how to use TikTok. And we're not that far apart in generation, so that just tells you how fast information is changing and the way that people consume information. And that's a challenge for us, but I think it is to some extent incumbent upon people who hold our positions or candidates who are running for office or whatever to meet voters at where they're at. So it's good feedback. I appreciate it.
Thanks. On behalf of the League, I'd like to recommend to students that you look for nonpartisan sources of information that you trust. The League of Women Voters runs a database called Vote 411. There's Vote.org, Rock the Vote, Ballotpedia, and even County in Washington State is required to do a voter pamphlet where the candidates that are running for office can do a why you should vote for me initiatives that are on the ballot or levies are in those voter pamphlets as well. And the League of Women Voters locally runs a voter guide where we link to candidates, campaigns, their financial filings with the FEC and the PDC, because it's always good to follow the money if you want to see who is pro and con any particular issue. And I'd strongly advise you to get used to looking at those sources when you're getting ready to vote. My question for the panel, because this comes up when we're in the community doing voter registration events, is how long are you guys going to keep track of what party I registered for?
We don't register.
No, I mean to vote in the presidential primary, I have to choose a party. So how long is that going to stay in the state's database?
60 days. But guess what? Not Marlene, but the parties are going to pull it.
Yeah.
Because that's how it ends up on the election candidate apps.
So yes, the parties are going to pull that information as soon as they possibly can because they're going to want to keep it. But I'm going to add another little piece of information that Auditor Elliott may not know. The Secretary of State's office also pulls that information and keeps it so it's available on public disclosure requests for a very long time.
And I would say, well, go back to the communication issue. The upside, I mean, parties get a lot of bad rap, and some of it's deserved, but they also are the organizations that try to mobilize voters and win elections and educate, them. And so they're one of the things that tries to get information out there to you. Now, obviously, you want to take that with a grain of salt. But as far as nonpartisan, to add to the sources of information, one that I'm a big fan of, I even give them money, is called Project Vote Smart. It's in my hometown of Des Moines, Iowa. It's a nonpartisan, basically they collect data on state and federal candidates, how their voting records of your senators, who gives them money, what they say. It's a very good and nonprofit source of information. So they're good. As far as money, there's a really good interest group that monitors money. Now they have their own agenda, which is they feel money is corrupting our system and so on. But called OpenSecrets.org, that they actually make it easier. The National Federal Election Commission, you can go in and find this out, but it's kind of hard to use their site. And so Open Secrets, you can find out a lot of things about groups, parties, and who they donate to and so on. So those are two other things that I always recommend to my students for.
I'd like to add one more thing that the league does at the state level. For candidates, they send a request out to all people who are running for office during each election and actually request that they fill out a questionnaire. And the candidates who fill those out, and not everybody does, that information has been posted on the state league website. So you can go into that website and actually look at the results of the questionnaire that those candidates fill out to help you also make decisions so you get a better idea of what they're about.
Thank you. We got time for a few more questions. Ivana, I see your hand.
Hello, hi, my name is Ivan. I'm a Central Washington University student, and my question is, what's the process of becoming a representative, a state representative, versus becoming a legislator, and how do they interact with each other?
So I think state representative and state legislator, or are you talking about like from a party representative, like a party delegate?
State representative.
Yeah, so state representative and legislator, one and the same thing, yeah. So, and it's the same process, right? So actually this spring, in May, we're gonna have our filing week. So the first week of May, if you're 18 years of age and you are a registered voter in the legislative district, you can file to be a state legislator, which is a state representative or a state senator. Representatives are 2 years, and senators get 4-year terms. So they're kind of offset in their election cycles. But yeah, no, it's an opportunity that's out there.
And there are no minimum qualifications to apply. All you have to be is 18 years old and a registered voter.
Right, and then you would run in a primary, okay, that Washington State does a nonpartisan primary, so everybody who wants to be in that office is listed, and they say what party they prefer. And one of the things that irks us political scientists is some of these people make things up that have, don't exist, or whatever, but they can call themselves whatever they want, and you all run, so everybody wants to be state senator from our district runs on one ballot, and the top 2 candidates that get the vote, they advance to the general election. So they could be 2 Democrats or 2 Republicans, or somebody could be the pizza party if they wanted to call it that, or whatever. And then that's the general election. So our state really doesn't do party nominate. People still run, but the primary is more of a, as Jerry said, a winnowing process. But yeah, after you get filed, you'd have to run against a whole bunch of, well, it depends on how many people also file, and then you would run against them, and then the top 2 end up going to the election in November.
Does anyone else have a question? We'll go with Charles, and then we'll go with Lisa.
Okay, so like the president, right, is voted on by the Electoral College, unlike some of our other elections, which he's popular with. I know that a lot of people who don't have a great grasp of the Electoral College have concerns over like the way that our president is voted on, especially with 2016 and how Hillary won the popular vote but lost the Electoral College. What are your feelings about kind of that voting system?
I think this is Dr. Schaefer.
Okay, so to make it a long story short, we vote indirectly. The people who wrote the Constitution figured, some of them thought we weren't smart enough to pick the president ourselves. Others felt it was too impractical. Back then, a horse and buggy. So basically what they came up with was you were supposed to pick people to pick the president for you. And so it'd be like your student government elections, instead of you voting directly, you vote by dorm, and they'd say, Stevens Whitney gets 3, and you would pick those people to go to the circ to pick the president for you. Okay, well originally the electors were free agents, kind of like I was talking about with the delegates before. But that's one thing that the party started organizing and kind of rigging, well not rigging per se, but they were putting up. So when you vote in Washington State, we get 12 electors because it's figured out by how many representatives and senators you get. And basically the Democrats put up 12 loyal Democrats who vow to vote for Biden, and the Republicans put up 12 who vow to vote for probably Trump, but or whatever, and the Libertarians do the same. And whichever candidate wins in that state, those electors go to them. Now, there's some weird wrinkles, okay. But the idea is that it isn't a direct election, but it's more direct and democratic than it was at our founding, because these people have to vote for who, won the state. But it does create a weird situation where, because we throw the senators in, that helps the little states out, and because it's done by state line, not nationally, if, say, I win California by 5 votes, and that's worth a lot of electors because it's got more population, and you kick my butt in Alaska, Vermont, and other places, when we add up all the votes, I might get more electors than you, and that's what happened in 2016. It's rare, it hasn't happened that often. But yeah, it's a controversial system. So is it better than I personally think we vote directly for every other office, so why shouldn't we vote? And we're Americans, we're not Washingtonians, really, when it comes to president, so we probably should vote popular vote. But there are arguments for keeping it, and it helps smaller states. You can argue it limits voter potential for voter fraud because they'd have to, pick several states, even though that's really kind of overblown. But yeah, I wouldn't get into that. But it's just one of the unusual things about how our country was founded. It goes back to what I said before about the presidency is a national office, but we're a nation of states, and so that's how it's been. I think I'll stop there.
And then my follow-up question, because I had a question and then I forgot it the minute Noel started walking towards me, so I asked another question that I also had. But anyway, so to vote in the primary, you have to pick either Republican or Democrat. But what if you don't identify as either of those parties? Because that is, like you said, kept in a database, and they'll probably send you mail and everything. So.
Yes. Yeah, I'm good. That's a tough one because you have to pick one or the other in order to participate because it is a nominating process for the parties. So that's something that my office is already encountering, and we're going to continue to encounter. I've got sticky notes on my desk because what I tell my staff is if you get folks who are if you've got folks who have questions, go ahead and answer those questions. But if you get folks who are upset, right, and some folks do get upset, hey, I don't want to identify as this, I want to vote for this person, or I want to be an independent and really want to get into it, that just comes to me. So I've got a list of sticky notes on my desk to answer that same question, and it's tough. I think that the best thing I tell people is it is a choice of voters. Obviously, we want folks to participate, but it is a voter decision to do so. And if you feel strongly about, hey, I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, and I don't want my information out there, then your vote in that sense is saying, hey, I'm not going to participate in this process, but it doesn't prohibit you from participating in any other future election. You're not tied to anything you do in the presidential primary, whether you don't vote, whether you mark Democrat or Republican, it is irrelevant. You can vote for whoever you want in November. So.
All right, we have time for one more question. I know it is almost 6 p.m., so I want to be respectful of everyone's time.
Hello, my name is Melissa. I'm a student here at Central, and my question is, so I appreciate all the places that you all mentioned to find information, and as Auditor Elliott mentioned, there are some presidential candidates who have suspended their campaigns. Are there any places we can find information to support those with active campaigns? Where would we find that information?
I'm sure they all have websites. I mean, seriously, that's the only place I would know. Nikki Haley says hers out every 2 seconds, and Donald J. Trump says his, and those are really the only 2 Republicans left on the that are still running right now. Democrats, I'm sure they have the same ones, or same thing.
I think I would answer the same way. It's really hard to find out that information unless you're watching the news all the time. So you look at the candidates that are on the ballot, go to those websites, and my hope would be that those who have suspended their campaign would have at least indicated that on those websites to be able to help you.
And I'd say, well, you do have another option, which is to vote for unpledged delegates, okay? You can send a message that way, and they're free agents. Now, they're going to decide when they go there how they want to or whatever, or you can vote for the people that have suspended their campaigns. Their delegates will probably become unpledged unless they want to be sticklers and say, oh yeah, vote for me on the ballot. Now, will it change the result? No, but it might send a message. So that is an option you have. But you will be recorded by see, one of the other things about us having this nonpartisan primary is it's really hard for the parties to find out who their supporters are. So that's why they want that information. So they will gather that. So that is the downside, I guess, to the whole process. But if you really don't like any of them, I guess you can wait till November to vote or not participate.
Can I ask a quick question, if any of you would, other than TikTok, what kind of media, how can we get messages out?
Holler it out.
Yeah, go ahead, yell it.
Instagram Reels.
Which is TikTok, but 2-3 weeks later, right?
Yeah.
So my wife sends me.
We just need to keep up with the trends mostly.
Right, and as far as like Hispanic voters at Univision and the other media platforms? No?
Facebook, Twitter.
Facebook you actually do. Your Facebook.
I know a lot of Hispanic people still consider Facebook like pretty central to like, you know, the way they get the media, especially since we're talking about like multi-generational people. So Facebook, to a lot of people, especially in the Hispanic community, it is essential, especially with like, you know, Univision and all that.
And so do you think either party have speakers, have candidates or whatever, and had them posted here at Central, we get much response? Just curious.
Probably more than what you're already getting.
Thank you.
All right, now, can we get a big round of applause for all our candidates? I want to thank all of you for your time. There was so many good conversations going on. Thank y'all for bringing your expertise and all of your experience and sharing it with us. I just want to say the recording of this event will be shared on the League's YouTube channel, ECTV2, Spectrum Channel 191, and ASC we will figure out a way to get this recording to all of you. You can still register to vote in this primary by going to votewa.gov or the County Auditor's Office. And don't forget to vote. ASCWU and the Auditor's Office will be having the Voting Engagement Hub on March 12th. We will release more information on when it will be open, but usually it lasts like throughout the whole day. So that'll be in this very room also. There will be computer set up, and if y'all haven't even registered to vote then, like y'all can do that. We can get everything set. If y'all want to register to vote, y'all could actually, I highly encourage you to check out the League of Women's Voters table back there. They got some forms that y'all could fill out. I also highly encourage y'all to check out the CWU Library table as well. If you are here for University 101 credit, the QR codes are back there also at both of the tables. Thank you so much to all of our sponsors. It's ASCWU, CWU Libraries, Ellensburg Public Library, and the League of Women Voters. So once again, please go vote, make a difference, and thank you so much. Good evening. Please eat the food. If y'all haven't got food, please get some food. Feel free to hang out. We got some people that can give you some more information back there. Check out the tables. Please get some food. Y'all have a great night. Thank you so much.